Hello and welcome to the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show. Today is a deep dives episode. I am your co-host Nick Johnson, and with me as always my co-host Paige Otto. Paige, how are you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing great, Nick. Less than a week than draft day, so it's definitely exciting. I think me and you are both extremely just, soaking it all in, but also our kind of brains are kind of mush at this point. But I
Yeah.
mean, this is where, the fun begins, really.
I think I think the over-under will be set at double digits for how many hours of sleep I get between now and the end of next week.
Yeah, yeah. I'll set the line at a total of like, I don't know, 36 hours.
That's generous, but I'll certainly take it. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and yes, our
Yes.
brains are turned to mush. But we are closing out our series of deep dives, roulette, deep dives, look backs, and today we've got the bigs, and we've got a couple exciting guys up top. I think both of them have at least a candidacy for going in the lottery, although I'd be more willing to bet on one of them than the other. But we had an exciting slate of big men all year long, and the good news is that only 75% of them withdrew. So, we've got that going for us.
There we go. I mean, I'll take that over, zero. So,
Well, yeah. That's slightly better. We do have some people to talk about at least. Shall we get into it?
yeah, let's do it.
All right. So up first from the big men that we covered this year, there can only be one, and I would bet odds are that he goes in the lottery somewhere, probably late lottery, but certainly I would be surprised if he is not the first big man of the 2026 deep dives class off the board. And this was your pick in Merez Johnson Jr. out of Michigan. So despite him playing for the other university in Michigan, from your perspective, Paige, why did you go with Merez Johnson Jr.? What did you see in his game that made you pick him for deep dives so many months ago?
Yeah, I think when I feel like I'm like a played record at this point because I feel like we've talked about Morez in so many episodes, but the guy is that good. I mean, he's built like a like he's massive in person, right? You kind of get that same feel when you're looking at a Jalen Duren or an Ade Mara too or Yaxel, right? Like their front court of players were just so big and so powerful and strong. And Merez Johnson, like he has an insane motor. He's a leader. He's improved from his freshman year at Illinois to Michigan to this year, right? 6'10, 250. Like he has an NBA ready frame, right? He's ready to play playoff minutes. And he also is improving with his shooting mechanics, and the shot is there compared to some of the other bigs that are kind of in like the end of lottery range, mid 20s range. Like he's shown improvements, like his mechanics are there. He has a good base, he has a good follow through, right? And he's just shooting a little bit under 80% from the free throw line, which is super encouraging to me. And like one of the games that I saw, which was one of their only losses on the season against Wisconsin, he did make a three in that game. And it wasn't like he had a ton of space to work with. Like he was running down in transition and he kind of just stayed on the perimeter, and Elliot Cadeau kind of threw the ball and, he banked it in, right? Like when he gets those shots, he's looking for them, but obviously he's not going to look at them, all the time, right? And he's such a versatile defender, great on his feet, has like these boxer feet to me, just very light on his feet, can kind of guard any position out there and kind of stay with him. I wouldn't want him all the time, on guards or at the point of attack, but when he's, switched onto them and hit hedges, blitz, whatever the case may be, he goes into them, and he's so powerful and can knock guards off their spot. And he's also an elite rim protector as well, and elite play finisher, right? I mean, he shot 73% at the rim or a little bit higher. Like this guy does not miss. And when he does, it's kind of like not of his own doing, but like players miss, right? That's going to
Yeah.
happen. But he really is a elite high feel guy as well. And I think he has some more playmaking chops to his game too. And he knows how to play with, other players of his talent, right? I mean, him working around, Yaxel that can dribble pass shoot at 6'9" and kind of working with Ade Mara, especially in transition. Like, I think when you're looking at where he'll go in the draft, right? Like, there's a lot of options, and I think OKC at 12 is kind of the place I'm kind of eyeing a lot for him. I know a lot of people are like, okay, like, why would you choose Merez Johnson over Ade Mara? Like, I still have some more questions about Mara, right? Because they already have Chet, right? And they also have iHeart, depending on, if iHeart stays. But I think Merez kind of, as we saw in the playoffs, like, physicality is the name of the game, right? And Merez Johnson has no ifs, ands, or buts about if he's physical or not, or powerful, because he's so ferocious in terms of, hey, he can back up Chet with the stronger, true big man, right? That we saw in Wemby, and we saw in, a lot of other big men in the playoffs too, that kind of just gave Chet trouble down there. And Merez Johnson can kind of be that first line of defense, but he can also be, a small ball five too, because he can kind of rotate all over the place.
Yeah, you and I have mentioned our skepticism about Ademara before, and he's climbed up my boards as of late, mostly just because there is some element to his, at least his passing and his rim protection that is hard to deny with his size. But I think you would agree with the notion that Morez and Yaxel did a lot more to make that three big-ish lineup work than Mara did. They were the guys who were switching out. They were the guys who were adjusting. And I truly don't think that outside of like Miami, LeBron, there's really been anybody who can genuinely guard 1 through 5. But
Yeah.
even 2 through 5 is exceptionally rare. And Merez Johnson is absolutely a 2 through 5 guy. Yeah, you probably don't want him on the quickest of point guards. You might not necessarily want him on some centers, but for the most part, he's going to be able to guard 2 through 5, and he's going to be able to do it quite effectively. I am curious about the stuff with the shot, though. I mean, on the one hand, his massive improvement from the free throw line gives me a real positive sign that okay, this is not just small sample shooting luck. This is genuine growth. He did only take 35 threes on the year, which again, I don't know if that means, I mean, from 0 the year before, right? It's hard to have anything to, base it against sample size wise. But as you mentioned, I mean, the form looks good. And again, the fact that he's as good as he is at the free throw line does give me hope that that can be more and more integrated into his game as he goes along. But really, for me, the sell with Morez is just the exceptional defensive versatility. And yeah, as you mentioned, just absolutely elite finisher. And again, those are the kinds of things where, something I've thought about quite a bit in this draft in particular is, every player every player that's going to be considered as a draft prospect has things that they're good at, right? And the question is just how much does that matter for NBA translation? Like, just to give a random example, if, Merez Johnson was running, all of his plays out of post ups and, was decently effective at those, but those aren't looks that he's going to get at the NBA level, I might be a bit concerned. And he does have quite a high volume of post ups. He does well enough on them that I'm not too concerned about that. But the general idea being, okay, we saw what he did this year at Michigan, but unlike with a lot of other college players, he wasn't the only guy who was trying to operate out of the spots that he was trying to operate out of. And so, it's one of those things where I do wonder if, him having more room to operate down low gives him better chances than what he was getting with Mara clogging up the paint, because that's kind of what Mara does on both
Yeah.
ends, and often for better, but quite often also for worse. And so it's again, I mean, his most frequent play type was cuts, and
Mhm.
he was in the 91st percentile. He shot 77% on his
Yeah.
cuts, right? That is something that is very, very clearly going to translate over to the NBA. His exceptional motor, right? He got a ton of looks on offensive rebounds. That's definitely going to carry over. 97th percentile in transition, shot even better, shot 77%. And that included a couple threes as well that he hit in transition, including the one that you mentioned, right? Everything that he did, with the exception of his post up volume, I think will translate very easily, very directly. And furthermore, if he is someone who you're having guard 2 through 5 and you're playing him in a multi big lineup like he did at Michigan, that's when post ups for players like Merez Johnson can be effective. When it's like, oh, they've cross matched him on this 6'4" guard. Yeah, eat him up. Right? It's like there's
Yeah.
nothing he's going to be able to do about that. And so if those are the kinds of post ups he's getting, and he's continuing to get all the cutting opportunities. Presumably, he'll have more chances to run out in transition on a team that almost certainly will play faster than the Michigan Wolverines played this past season. It's not just that he does things that modern big men are expected to do at a very high level. It's that I see all of that translating very cleanly, very easily. And then really the only question is how much more room does he have to build from there?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, you mix that in with, he's an exceptional cutter. He's great in transition. He's shown improvement of his shot. But he's also an elite rebounder to create extra possessions too. And, with Merez Johnson too, like he's not the type of, big man that will just be around the dunker spot waiting for things to happen. Like he's constantly moving, constantly getting into plays, creating extra possessions. His defensive rebounding rate for his career is over 20%, right? Like this guy is in every play. Like he's not going to back down from any physical types that are taller than him, bigger than him, whatever the case may be, because he showed that even though he was playing with, Mar and Yaxel, like he was still a leader in that sense, right? And I think with him too, like his rise over, we talk a lot about prospects that are more in like the second round range, but, we talked about Morez and like Cam Carr that are lottery picks at this point, right? Which is pretty exciting. I think Morez, like his ceiling is just getting higher to me. Like I think he has the potential to be like an all defensive type player because motor can't be taught and rebounding as well, especially for his size. And I mentioned how quick his feet are. He has great hands. And I can just see him fitting into a lot of different schemes. I think OKC won't let him fall at 12, but they might package 12 and 17 together to move up to get their guy. And like I'm not 100% sure Merez Johnson is their number one guy in this draft, but he could slip to Miami, Charlotte. Like I don't think he's going to go less than 14 just because of all the great things about his game. And he also doesn't shy away from, what his game actually is, which is super comforting to me in a big man.
I'm curious with one last sort of thing with him, which is I don't have questions about it, but I am curious what you think in terms of his stamina because he only played 25 minutes a game, but only one person on Michigan played even 30 minutes, and that was the Axel playing 30.2, right? They had a deep rotation, and they used everybody in that rotation. So it's not necessarily something that like I'm worried about, but I think there is the element to which so much of his game is predicated on his incredibly high energy level. Is he someone who, let's say he goes to OKC, they'll probably only play him like 15 minutes a game, and that would be a huge plus. I guess the question is, and again, I'm not particularly worried about it. I think that was more of a Michigan scheme thing than anything else, but I'm curious where you're at on that front, because if that is an issue, that's certainly an area for improvement. And, given what he does well, more minutes of Morez is a positive.
Yeah, I think like one of the main players that like I also have gotten to see a lot just because I live in Michigan is Beef Stew, right? Isaiah Stewart. And like when he's obviously, foul trouble and, all the things that go on with Isaiah Stewart being Isaiah Stewart, right? But when he's in, he's playing such impactful minutes when he comes in for Dern. And even when, Dern's not on the floor, right? Like it kind of depends. Like I could see him, obviously he only played like 25 minutes per game. And then with Illinois as well, a little bit 17.6, but he only played in 30 games, right? And started 8, right? Like I think he can grow into playing more minutes depending on the scheme. And I think for a team like OKC, it's kind of like, why would we not play him as much as he can handle, right? Because he's so impactful and he can just make a lot of players better too, in my opinion. And I think him playing with their newest addition of Jared McCain as well. Like he's a great screener. He's great coming off of DH or giving DHOs to shooters and just, attacking the glass. And I think it's kind of like, why would we not want another a 6'10", 250 guy that creates extra possessions on us on the floor as much as we can?
So the other big man who is likely to go in the first half of the first round, let's say, is Hanna Steinbach out of Washington. And he was my pick, and if I'm remembering correctly, when I picked him was like right after he got back from his injury, I think. But he's someone who really burst onto the scene in the summer, actually, when he was incredibly dominant for the German FIBA U19 team, and then went to Washington, and basically all of the ways in which he was dominant carried over, I think is the best way that I can put it. I mean, there aren't many freshmen who average 19, 12, and 2 with, a steal and a block per game like Hanna Steinbach did. And, it's one of those things where the first thing that stands out about Steinbach is this is, in a good way, one of the least movable, not least mobile, but least movable bigs. He gets on his spot and he stays there. And he, 12 rebounds is one way of saying he absolutely cleans up on the glass. 15% offensive rebound percentage. This guy just absolutely inhales boards. And it's interesting because he had virtually identical shooting numbers to Morez in terms of 34% from 3-point range on quite limited volume, but really good shooting at the free throw line, making it seem like, okay, this is a shooting indicator that I can buy going forward. He had 76% of his free throws. But with Steinbach, really, the defensive playmaking in terms of steal and a block per game aside, I think that is the part of his projection that I'm most worried about. But ultimately, I mean, here are his final 5 games of the season: 22-11 against Wisconsin, 22-24 against USC with 2 blocks, 26-13 against Oregon, 10-11 against USC. That's, the one dud in there. And then closing out the season with 25 points, 16 rebounds, 3 blocks, 2 assists, and a steal against Wisconsin, right? He just absolutely stuffs the stat sheet. And it's one of those things where I'm not quite sure where he's going to go. I mean, certainly from what I've been hearing, it seems like he's comfortably in the first round, but probably not going to be a lottery guy. But, you were mentioning Merez at 12 to OKC. If Hannes is on the board at 17 and OKC takes a non-big man at 12, it would be hard for me to see them steering away from him because, again, there are concerns about his lateral mobility, certainly. And I think the fact that he measured out at 6'10 and a quarter with a 7'2 and a quarter wingspan is helpful, just in the sense that I think there were concerns about him, being maybe undersized, and clearly, 6'10 and a quarter, 248 with that kind of wingspan. The size is not going to be an issue. And I wasn't particularly worried about that anyway, given how he's, shoving around people who are much older than him, certainly at the college level. Obviously U19, he's playing against people his age because that's how those things work. But yeah, I mean, 24 rebounds in a college game. And, not to belabor the point too much, but he didn't exactly have very much help at Washington, right? It was him, it was Zoom Diallo, it was Desmond Claude and Wesley Yates, sort of. And that was kind of it. Like, there basically nothing around him. And the fact that that team finished 16-17, like the fact that they had only barely a losing record as opposed to dramatically a losing record has a lot to do with the fact that Hanna Steinbach kept them in a whole lot of games they absolutely should not have been in.
Yeah, I think Hanna Steinbach I think he's being a little bit underrated because if you look at kind of like with the guards in this class too, like Abuka Okori is starting to gain, some steam. I know a lot, like Albert and Corey kind of have some top 10 juice on him, right? And I think it's because like as the guard class and big man class are, like it's so deep when you really think about it. And Steinbach, like he's not going to blow you away athletically, right? He's kind of slower on your feet compared to, Merez Johnson or Terrance Reed that, is just an emphatic play finisher. And can do it on both ends of the floor. Hanna Steinbach's not really going to wow you in that way, right? But he also has a +9 standing reach. He's 6'11", right? The +7'2" wingspan, led the NCAA in rebounding this year, was insanely productive as a freshman. And if you're a team like OKC, it's kind of like, okay, well, we have Chet to the, rim protect him. And we also have another 6'11" guy that, can pick and pop and can run the floor when he needs to, but he can also, at least, stand his ground when he's switched on faster guards or out on the perimeter because he's so insanely productive. And I think, he's not the best athlete, like I said, but he's not like everything's gone about him athletically, right? Like he's the type of big man that, can space the floor, can create extra possessions for you and just dominate the glass. And he's not going to, make a lot of mistakes as well. And I think he's just going to continue to rise as we get closer to the draft. I mean, we're less than a week away, right? Like it's, which is crazy to say out loud,
Yes.
which is like, where has the time all gone? But he just stands out a lot to me. I think a lot of teams in that range you should think about, drafting Hanna Steinbach, because one, he could be he's also an international prospect too. Like he's from Germany. Like I think people like forget that as well. And I don't know if it's because like Washington, Pacific time, like I don't know, maybe a lot of people haven't like watched his games because he's in Washington, but like a lot of his games were also like late, right? And I think the same with Zubia Gapor. Like I think a lot of people that are getting into the draft or wanting to learn about these prospects are just figuring out how good these players really are, because they didn't get to play in March Madness, which, was only a couple months ago. And it kind of makes you forget a second about, other prospects that could go in that top 20 range. And I think Hanna Steinbach is definitely one of those players. And I also think if he were to drop and the Pistons, keep their pick at 21, he could be an option for them too, because not only is he a double-double machine, but he also adds that size on the perimeter, and he also is able to stretch the floor when needed as well. And I think just his consistency and production, like I fall in love with those guys every day of, I don't care like if they're older or younger, but if they're producing and they're also, playing at such a higher offensive usage that they're going to be in the NBA, it's green flags for me, right? So.
Yeah. Older Deep Dives fans will know the bit that, stop me if you've heard this one, that I absolutely ran directly into the ground. But for the entirety of his draft cycle, I referred to Alperen Sengun as future Hall of Famer Alperen Sengun, because nothing I have ever said has pissed off Tyler Metcalf more than calling Alperen Sengun future Hall of Famer Alperen Sengun. But the argument is the same. It's like at a certain point, there are only so many guys who can get 19 and 12 at the college level, just period. And so it's like, okay, there are some athleticism concerns. He actually did quite a bit better at some of the combine testing than certainly I would have expected. I mean, he had one of the higher verticals among the centers. He had the fastest lane agility time among the centers who tested at the combine. Like, he's not a stiff athletically, right? I'm not, trying to proclaim like, oh, this guy's actually secretly a mega athlete. Like that's that. I'm not going to go that far, right? But and I'm not going to say sneaky athlete either because, reasons. But I think that it's something where he has more in that regard than I think the general expectation of players who play like him have. But more to the point, again, like I would be, 19 and 12 would certainly be a surprise. But like if he struggles to rebound at a rate basis in the NBA, that would be stunning, because it's not quite like steals, which are like the most directly translatable box score stat from non-NBA level to NBA level, but rebounding is up there. And I mean, again, the dude had 24 rebounds in a game against USC, and it's one of those things where at a certain point there are teams that are just need production out of the 5 spot. And specifically for a team like OKC, where it's like, okay, great. Chet is our roaming defender, and Steinbach is in drop, and he's going to be grabbing all the rebounds. And, he will be the guy who, I mean, he's already got 40 pounds on Chet, right? Like, he'll be the guy who is stuck on bigger opposing big men. And unlike most guys who just turned 20 a month and a half ago, he's going to be able to hold up against NBA physicality better than almost anyone.
Yeah, and he has those shooting indicators as well. I mean, he only shot like 36% on less than 2 attempts from 3-point range, but on all jumpers, it was 38%. And the mechanics are good. The footwork is there. He has incredible footwork, especially in the post. He ranked, I believe, in the 79th percentile in post-ups, and in putbacks too, 79th percentile. Like, he has a lot more than I think people are kind of giving him credit for, of that. Like, he's, he had the potential and sparks of him being a shooter are there, right? And with him carrying such a high offensive usage, like Wesley Yates was also there to kind of help him out. But I mean, there's a lot of games that, if Hannes wasn't putting the ball in the basket, like Washington was in trouble, right? And I think as a freshman, carrying that high of an offensive load for, kind of the first time at the college level, it's kind of like, and he put up those numbers and he led the NCAA in rebounding. Like, that's crazy in itself. And I think just looking at, him as a big man that, as you mentioned, can play in drop coverage, can have indicators that he can stretch the floor and provide valuable minutes, and he can clean up the glass, right? And he's not the best athlete. Like, he's doing all the things that make up for him not being the best athlete in this big man class. So I think for, OKC, I think everyone's like on all the podcasts and everything is kind of like, what are they do? Like, what are they going to do? Like, and I think chaos is just going to strike come next week. So it's just fun to, go through all these scenarios as we get closer. But I could also see maybe Charlotte taking a chance on him. I think, let me see here. Where is the draft order? All my tabs are crazy.
It's that time of year.
Yes, it is. Maybe Toronto too at 19.
Yeah.
I could definitely see him going there as well. Yeah, I think he has a wide range for him, because I think he doesn't necessarily have to fit in a specific spot or scheme, or if a team's, missing a stretch big or a guy that can just, go to work in the post with his footwork. And, he has great hands as well. And he has a specific blend of mobility. He also provides a lot of pressure at the rim too, even though he's not a rim protector, right? But he also had like 1.8 blocks this season as well. So the indicators are there, but, if I'm comparing him and Merez Johnson, like, there's a lot more to give with Merez Johnson, just because he's also, been a winning player as well and has produced at such a high level with other, valuable prospects in this draft too.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the nod for Morez is, definitely the versatility, the flexibility, the athleticism. But, part of the reason that I did want to bring up some of the combine measurements, both in terms of his measurements and also some of the, agility and vertical stuff, is there is an element to, the counter to my Alperen Şengün jokes is, the Drew Timmies of the world, right? And first of all, the fact that he's doing this at 19/20 as opposed to 23/24 is, a point in his favor in that regard. But he was also in the 94th percentile in transition, right? He's not, again, I don't want to oversell his athleticism, but he's not the sort of plodding, post-ups weren't his most frequent play. Most of his plays were in pick and roll as the roll man, right? He's not the, hand the ball to Drew Timme down low 27 times a game and, he'll shoot 13 for 25 and get fouled a ton. And then when you think about NBA transition, like, credit to him for getting a cup of coffee at the NBA level, because that was honestly more than I expected from Drew Timme. But there is a vast gulf between, this guy was only productive because he was the oldest player playing against a bunch of, undeveloped teenagers, right? Steinbach was that teenager and he was still grabbing 12 boards a game.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about with Drew Timme, but that's something you have to watch out for, these overly productive kind of borderline athletes in terms of, you're 6'11", 240, right? Like, it says a lot that, he also went to the line about five times per game too. Like, he's driving his way to the rim. He's forcing his way through, and it's not by his athleticism. It's by his footwork, because he understands, how am I going to get around, the faster threes of the world, right? The perimeter players, because he can take it off the dribble. Like, I think his ball handling does need a little bit of work of him to take total control in the post in the NBA. But for him to do that while also being a menace on the glass says a lot to me as well.
All right, shall we move on to our next group here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so up next we have two guys who were definitely solidly in the second round when we talked about them on deep dives, and one guy who was maybe a little bit higher, but I think is still probably a first round pick. So let's start with the more encouraging stories of that group that I mentioned, and start with Zubia Gapor, who had a special year at St. John's and really proved a ton in terms of his NBA future. But Zuby was your guy. So what made you go with Zuby for deep dives when however many months ago we did that episode?
Yeah, similar to the sell on Joshua Jefferson, right? He's a player that can just do everything on the basketball court, right? Like he is just a proven he knows what his game is like. He's 6'9", 245 pounds. He has playmaking chops. He also is a versatile defender. He can work the point of attack, perimeter, very mobile. You know, wouldn't say he's a big man. He kind of fits into this positionless basketball. Same with Joshua Jefferson, right? Like you can just plug and play with him in every scenario, right? And he also played with, you know, Bryce Hopkins and Dylan Mitchell at St. John's. And his sell is also on the defensive end, right? With Joshua Jefferson, it's not as much, but in terms of them fitting into an NBA scheme, I kind of fit them into, okay, this guy doesn't really have the nod of like he's a, you know, one big man, but he can also play, you know, multiple positions on the floor, and he can also produce at a very high level. And I think the thing with Zuby is that I think you mentioned whenever we did the mock draft or whatever, Nick, like him or Joshua Jefferson with Denver. Like you're gonna, if you had him or Joshua Jefferson playing off of Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray and just having a player that can play off ball and on the ball, and it's just a relentless downhill driver that Zuby is, like he just muscles his way to the free throw line and to the rim as well. And I think when you're looking at Zuby too, he's another riser. I feel like all of our deep dive guys are risers, Nick. But I mean, he can just fit in so many different scenarios. And I think he's the type of player that we're going to look back on and, you know, many years and say, how did this guy like not go higher? And I think these guys that are, you know, good at a ton of different things, but not masterful at, you know, one specific thing that, you know, draws you to them initially, it's kind of like, am I overthinking this? And there's no reason really to think Zubia Gapor, but if the only overthink I would, you know, think of is that, okay, how would he actually fit in a scheme? Like how many minutes is he going to play at the NBA level? Does it depend if he's playing with, you know, a true 5 big man that, you know, is sort of that playmaking hub, ferocious, you know, rim protector that has inklings of spreading the floor? How does Zuby kind of fit into that? But he can. And I think the Nuggets are a fun fit for him. I also think the Timberwolves is super fun for him, like playing with Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, of course, Anthony Edwards. And I think him playing with TSJ too and Io DeSumo would be super fun and at Minnesota at 27 or 23 or 27.
The thing with Zuby that I think jumps out to me the most is how much growth he showed as a playmaker. And that I think is really what sort of brought him from the okay, interesting piece, can fit in a lot of different lineups to we've really got something here. And you know, that sort of connective play, again, I mean, it's easy to throw, hey, this guy's an amazing passer, put him on Denver, have him work with Nikola Jokic, right? See what happens. But the shot blocking is, you know, something that I think makes that Jokic Nuggets fit in particular really stand out to me in the sense of, hey, he has these sort of crazy interior passing chops that would just be fun to put alongside Nikola Jokic, but he's also got the shot blocking ability to, you know, be the backline cover, right? To be that weak side guy, to be that sort of last line of defense. And the other sort of connective stuff, I mean, certainly the defensive connective stuff is incredibly impressive. The shooting has been coming along slowly over the course of his college career. And I mean, you know, I wouldn't be all the way sold on him as like a floor spacing threat at this point, but clearly that's something he's put in the work on, right? I mean, he took 8 attempts his first season at St. John's, then, you know, shot 22% the season after, and this year 31% on more volumes than his previous 3 college seasons combined, right? That's a strong indicator. And free throw percentage steadily creeping up, but more to the point, he got to the line an insane number of times, which, you know, that like he got to the free throw line 7 times a game.
Yeah.
And excuse me. And in addition to that sort of relentlessness in terms of attacking the basket, he dropped his foul rate while increasing his block rate by 50%. That's not something you see every day. Also, really positive sign. And the synergy that he had with Dillon Mitchell. And granted, I know I'm biased on that front because, hey, to everybody who listened to our episode last week when we did the forwards, we talked about Dillon Mitchell, right? It's no secret that I've been in Dillon Mitchell's corner for quite a while, but the interior passing between those two was really what drove St. John's this year, was just the ways in which they managed to make things work. And, Bryce Hopkins as, the secondary scoring threat was obviously a huge part of it as well. But a lot, it's funny because, there were quite a few players on St. John's who heading into this year were higher on boards than Zuby. And, here we are at the end of the year and he's sort of the lead guy for them, both in terms of the team itself and also in terms of what we're talking about with draft stock here. It's difficult to find a team where Zubia Gapor doesn't fit and doesn't enter the rotation and doesn't help out in some capacity. And that's, I think, why he's been one of these late draft risers, is sort of that general around the draft / NBA world consensus of, wait a minute, are we overthinking this guy? Like, why is he not higher with everything that he can do at the high level that he can do it?
Yeah, I think, the short sell is that, he has a high basketball IQ, right? He has that defensive prowess to his game, playmaking feel, gutsy motor, that, me and you both just fall in love with guys like that. Like we kind of just sing their praises all year long, right? Because it's kind of hard to bet against those guys. And I think with Zuby as well, he also has such quick decision-making instincts as well that can't be taught. And he's grown year after year, which is a huge sign. And I think the shot making, if you look in the numbers and synergy on jump shots, he only shot 34% on all jump shots, 34% on catch and shoots, but at the rim, 62%. Like he has such a tight and strong handle for the type of player that he is. And I think his free throw rate is because of that, because he has such a skillful mind of, how do I cut corners around? How do I get to the baseline and get an angle on these guys? How do I kick out to my shooters? He's always thinking. You can see it on film. Like he's always thinking about what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? How can I move to this spot to get a better shot off or to make a better pass to my teammates? And he's also has that bully ball game to him as well. And I think my two top, fits for him, like I mentioned, are, obviously Nuggets at 26 and then Timberwolves at 28, but I don't see him coming out of going out of the first round, Nick. Like I would be so surprised if he were to fall out of the second round, because why would you not want a guy that has shown that he's improved every year? He has that motor to his game. He's high feel, high basketball IQ, has, inklings of, hey, I can possibly stretch it out the next level. Like there's indicators of that. And he's also has that shot blocking to his game that you maybe wouldn't think of, because he's kind of fits into this Joshua Jefferson kind of weird mold of like, he's not really a big man, but can kind of play like that because he's so versatile in terms of he has great feet as well. And he can also kind of operate in transition. Like he's kind of a player that if you were to look at him, it's kind of like, don't judge a book by its cover, right? Because he does have that strength and power that in the playoffs, like you need that. And I think Zuby could come in off the bench and, play winning basketball for your team, make game-winning plays. And I also think a fun fit for him too would maybe be the Spurs at 20, because I think as the Spurs showed, especially in the finals against the Knicks, is that they had an all-time collapse in all of those games, right? And I think Zuby, whenever I just watch him on film, he has just this calm kind of presence to him. Like he really is thinking about every single scenarios of, how am I going to attack this possession? How am I going to create extra possessions? And I think him pairing with Victor Wembanyama, playing off Julian Champagny, Fox, and obviously the elite backcourt of Harper and Castle. I think him fitting in there, kind of a veteran guy too, an older guy from, their starting lineup, and him coming in, he's going to, be just an asset all around for what the Spurs already have.
Yeah, we're admittedly cheating a bit by putting him in the big man category, but hey, he won the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar award.
Yeah.
So, they call him a center. They call him a center. We'll call him a center. His mama called him a center. I'll call him a center. But The thing with Zuby and, first of all, the Spurs fit. I mean, we just, on our most recent mock draft over at NoCeilingsNBA.com, we had him
Yeah.
going to the Spurs at 20. Tyler Rucker will be very happy to hear me say, I don't think there's any way he falls past the Celtics.
Yeah.
Like, I do love the Minnesota fit as well, but I just don't see the Celtics front office passing up on a guy who checks so many boxes for them.
Yeah, I think you can talk him into any of those 4 teams, and I think those front offices would be jumping for joy if they were to land Zubia Gapor, but I also don't think the Spurs would let him fall to the Celtics, right? Because it's kinda like, do we wanna see, like, Zuby in the finals? Like, I don't know, like, I think he's just that type of impact player that can impact the game in so many ways, and for him, I can just see him, coming off of ball screen actions, throwing lobs to Victor Wembanyama, crashing the boards, creating extra possessions, and just playing winning basketball. And why would you not want a player that exhibits all those qualities for your team?
So up next, we have someone who I think is a bit more traditional of a big man in Terrance Reed Jr. out of UConn. And yeah, I mean, he has had a quite successful college career for himself across Michigan and UConn, but he's also someone who, really has risen pretty dramatically throughout the year. But Paige, this was your guy as well. So what made you go with Terrance Reed?
Yeah, I think it's the same way as why I picked Merez Johnson is that Tarris Reed, he kind of had a rough start with Michigan. And I saw him when he was freshman, sophomore at Michigan. And, the talent was always there, right? He wasn't getting as much of opportunities as I would have liked in his first 2 seasons. And then he came to Connecticut and he kind of showed a lot more of what I want to see, right? I think he's an underrated passer. I think with him, he's such a ferocious, elite rebounder. I mean, he had a game where he had 27 rebounds, right? Like, and he also is able to contain big man, right? Like we saw with him with Ademara in the national championship game, right? Like obviously Michigan went on to become national champions, and kind of sucks for Terrance Reed because he was at both of those schools, right? But I think he kind of grew into himself. He grew into his game. And he's such a versatile defender. He plays great off of tagging, blitzing, hedge actions, and he's also great at playing with elite shooters. He played with Alex Caravan. Watching him and Caravan kind of play this 2-man game coming off DHOs, like he can fit with the elite shooters at the NBA level because he's great on his feet as well. Has that boxer feet like Merez Johnson does. He's also 6'10" with a 7'4" standing reach, like. This guy's arms are insanely long. Like he is a mammoth of, a human being, right? And he's such an elite rim defender as well. As I mentioned, just a menace at navigating ball screen coverages, great screener. Obviously he, was hurt to start the season, had the hamstring injury, right? Kind of played out of that. And I mentioned it on our episode when we did talk about him. Like I could see him, fitting into that early season Adem Bona role for the Philadelphia 76ers. Like he just comes in and just makes the most of every single moment. But I think as we get closer to the draft, it's kind of like, I think the playoffs are kind of causing a lot of fuss of, we need physicality. We need not one, but, 2 big men that can protect the rim, play off multiple positions, is a versatile defender offensively and, defensively. And, Terrance Reed is not a shooter, right? Like he doesn't shoot threes, right? He's more of a big man that is going to clean up the glass for you, attack the rim, be efficient at the rim. But he's just, the glue big man, right? Like he's your motor, he's your heartbeat of your team. Your team goes as Terrance Reed Jr. goes. And I think with him too, his range too, like I could see him possibly going to the Spurs too. Like I think he kind of fits that culture there. It's not necessarily what they need, but I think he could just be another depth piece for them at the center position with, Wemby and Luke Cornett. And he comes in and he kind of just causes chaos. That's kind of how I describe Terrance Jr. Like he's going to cause chaos, wherever he goes. And like Hanna Steinbach, right? Like having a 20 plus, rebounding game is insane in college at any single level. And he did it a lot of times as well. Not as much as Steinbach, but he was definitely up there.
Yeah, with Terrace Reed, again, you're not getting any stretch element. He took 10 jump shots total the
Yeah.
entire year, right? That's not a part of his game. But, sort of as you mentioned with Merez earlier, very similar thing applies to Terrace Reed, and he knows his game, and he's not someone who's gonna junk up the game plan to sort of, get to his looks, right? He's not trying to isolate, beyond the 3 point line and pull up for a 30-footer, right? He knows what he's good at. And that sort of lends to the fact that he is low key one of the more impressive developmental stories in this draft, in my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, from playing, spot minutes, but, 12 and a half minutes a game, right? It's not like he was glued to the bench his freshman year at Michigan, to being in their starting lineup in his sophomore year and having some struggles. I mean, for the kind of player that he is, shooting 52% from the floor is not what you want to see. And the good news is he improved from the free throw line. The bad news is it was from 40% from the free throw
Yeah.
line to 59% from the free throw line. But what stands out to me most with his developmental story is this is a guy who had 17 assists to 71 turnovers in his sophomore year at Michigan and took a step back, transferred to UConn, came off the bench for a year, his junior year, and, figured out to a much greater capacity sort of how to pick his spots. And, he went from 27 minutes a game to under 20 minutes a game, but actually grabbed more rebounds in his junior year than he did in his sophomore year, and shot 67% from the floor, right? Was so much more efficient. And now in his senior year, he started, this was the first season of his college career where he had a positive assist to turnover ratio. And to me, that just screams, the notion of a lot of times, especially with big men in the modern NBA, where shooting has become so much more of a factor, so much more of a part of the requirements that are usually put upon big men. You don't normally see the kind of developmental story that is he took, yeah, okay, he took 4 threes this year. So technically more than he took in his sophomore year, where he made his 1 3 that he made in college, went 1 for 3, right? Not exactly saying all that much, but he got to a point where he improved from the free throw line, right? From sub 60 to above 60. It's not the sexiest jump, but it's an important one. But more to the point, he was just making mistakes all over the floor in his sophomore year at Michigan and not converting on the looks he needed to. And, he made that transfer to UConn, sort of reshaped his game into, having a better handle on, okay, what am I good at? What do I struggle with? What do I add to my game? What do I cut out of my game? And the fact that he went from, right from sophomore year to senior year, from 17 to 71 to positive assist to turnover ratio,
Yeah.
that's like, I can't remember the last time I saw, other than, I think the closest I can think of to that is Joel Embiid going from black hole, unable to pass his rookie year in Philly, to able to hit the passes he needed to out of the double team, able to hit those passes out of the post ups that he needed to. Terrace Reed going from just spraying the ball all over the place to someone who's actually helping the team with his passing rather than hurting. That is such an underrated part of his development. And the fact that, he took that step back, went from starting at Michigan to coming off the bench for UConn, from 27 minutes a game to fewer than 20 minutes a game. It's remarkable sort of how he managed to figure out, okay, these are my strengths. This is what works. This is what doesn't. And just continuing to build on that in a way that, again, it doesn't stand out like, oh, this guy went from a non-shoot, like, the story I always tell on here is of watching De'Ron Holmes's development as a shooter, right? From 1 for 7 his freshman year to 38% on the kinds of trail threes that he needed to be taking. That's easier to see than the kinds of developments that Terrace Reed went through, but it's no less impressive, certainly.
Yeah, and just to harp on his improvements, year after year, even from his junior season to UConn to this past year, obviously as a senior, with UConn too, his defensive rebounding rate lowered a little bit, right, to 19.4, but his assist rate took a 7-point jump to 17.8. Block percentage took a little bit of a hit, but at 8.4, but had a turnover rate of 13.4, and his usage was at 26.1. Like, he went on to have such a huge role for UConn and produced in, every stretch of imagination, right? Like seeing him from his freshman year at Michigan, where, he only played under 450 minutes there, didn't start any games to, he started 31 out of 32 games for Michigan. And then obviously his junior year for UConn only started one. And then to this year playing all 35 games, right? Like he is not only available, but he also has improved in every stretch of, the analytics sheet. And also, when you see him in person and on film, right? And I think for his fits, I was also thinking maybe Atlanta or the Knicks at 23 and 24 kind of look at him there, because why would you not want, a guy for him to, add depth to your front court, right? Like I could see him playing with Jalen Johnson, Jonathan Kuminga has that, chaos factor to him that I think Atlanta needs more of as well. Playing with CJ McCollum, passing out of, the short roll, DHO actions. Like I think that could be extremely fun. Him playing, that 2-man game with Jalen Johnson, possibly throwing lobs to Kuminga. Like I think they could work a lot around what Terrance Reed has to offer there. And obviously with the Knicks too, like him coming in for Mitchell Robinson and he just, an X factor off the bench. So I think those are kind of my two top fits for him as of now.
Yeah, I would also definitely look at San Antonio from his perspective.
Yeah.
Just, hey, if you want someone other than Luke Cornett to fill those minutes, he's someone who, again, because of the fact that there isn't as much stretch to his game, but that he would be playing with Wembanyama, it would be interesting to see them run sort of two big sets in that regard, because, Reed is someone who can bang on the interior, clean up a lot more mistakes. And then, when Wemby gets to the point that, he's really getting going, then you can sub Reed out, but just have him be that sort of physical, it's weird to say veteran about a guy who's about to be drafted, but, compared to some of the guys on the Spurs, he would be a veteran, right? That's I think one that would make a lot of sense for me. And then, this is another sort of right down the middle, but given what Luka Doncic has been saying in the last few days about I want a big man who can rebound and catch lobs. Yeah. Terrance Reed could do that.
Yeah, and he's 6'11", 265, right? Like pure and dry. Like I could definitely see him with also playing off Austin Reeves and Luke Kennard as well. Like there's so many options, and that makes it so exciting and fun for us too, just to work out all of these different scenarios. But yeah, I think if San Antonio were to pass on him there, maybe they go to, the Zuby Ejiofor round, next big man that we're going to talk about, Cenac. Like it'll be interesting to see where he falls. Like maybe he, Boston takes a look at him as well. Like I think he could fit in a lot of different schemes, just because I think we're also noticing this trend with NBA teams. It's kind of like, okay, if we already have, a lob finisher, elite play finisher out of the rim that can create extra possessions, but also has playmaking shots, why not just get another in the draft too? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Now that Luigi Swigo has withdrawn from the draft, Terrance Reed is officially the single biggest dude, the heaviest guy who's in the NBA draft. And, again, that heft is something that certain teams could use more than others. And if you're one of those teams, it's hard to look away, especially given everything else that he can do and the ridiculous measurements. I mean, like 6'10", basically 7'5" wingspan, just wild stuff. Insane. In terms of the physicality.
Yeah.
So you teased him. So now let's move on to Cenac Jr. And this was my guy. And I feel like I'm in a very weird place with Cenac. So what do you think about Cenac at this point in the draft process?
Yeah, and to kind of give a background to Cenac, 6'11", 240 pounds, 7'3" wingspan, 19 years old, coming out of high school, 5-star recruit at Link Academy, 5-star recruit, McDonald's All-American, right? He's your typical, I could see him at first. I was like, okay, this guy kind of reminds me of Chris Bosh in a way, of just like his frame, his size, kind of how he moves on both ends of the floor. But he really, when you're looking at his shooting, he has a rhythmic mid-range game. He's poised, calculated there, has some counters to his game, on dribble, juice, separation, but it's not as consistent as you want, right? He was also an emphatic finisher at the rim, shot a little bit over 70% there, but also struggled with, taking care of the ball, right? In terms of, his assist to turnover ratio. And with him playing with Kingsley Flemings, I think a big question we were asking ourselves is like, why do they not play as much pick and roll game as possible with, when you have him and Kingsley Flemings together, right? And I think it's because, with having Chris Cenac, like he's the type of prospect that he has such a high ceiling to me, but his floor is not as high as the other big man in his class for me, because I think he's still figuring out how he kind of fits with, his shot isn't as consistent, right? He's kind of like, okay, if he's trying to go into the mid-range so many times, how many times is he really going to get those shots at the next level, right? Because if he's not the 1 or 3 option, those looks are going to be limited. So it's kind of like, how does he translate to the NBA, right? Like, I think he has the size, he has the frame, he has the length, and he also has quick feet, but it's kind of like, I could see the Spurs at 20. I think this is like, we've mentioned like 4 players there, because I think they need some big man depth to their game. And also with Chris Neck, like he's the type of player that you can develop, right? Because his shot is good. The mechanics are there. He has a high release. But I think with Chris Cenac too, I think with him playing off of Kingsley Flemings is such a powerful, jump out of the gym type of athlete, that Chris Cenac also, was in the limelight too, because his offensive production, was not limited, but I don't think he's showcased as much as, he could do. He's not as good of a passer as you kind of want him to be. I think he's more of like a 4 at the next level, just because I think he has some things to figure out with his game.
So I sort of tease this, but I feel like I'm taking crazy pills with Chris Nick because the things that most people talk about with Chris Cenac are, the things that he was touted for as the 6th ranked prospect in his high school class. Oh, this is a 7-footer who can shoot. And then this past season at Houston, he was, raw numbers, he was the best finisher in the draft class. He finished 74% of his shots at the rim. And on the other side, he was one of the better rim protectors in the draft as well. Like opponents, took a ton of shots against him around the basket and they shot 47%. And yet it's like most of the conversation is, oh, how did this guy only get half a block a game? He's such an athlete. And, looking at, the draft combine numbers, he measured among the best of the center/big man group in pretty much every category. And, with the shot, like, he shot 33% from 3-point range and 62% from the free throw line, but he pretty much never got to the line. Like he took significantly more threes than free throws, which is not normally something that you say about a 6'11", 240 dude who was that crazy of a finisher around the rim while also being a really, really good rim protector who never blocked shots. And I'm baffled by everything about his profile. His most frequent play type were spot ups, right? And, okay, that's sort of expected, but, it was basically spot ups and cuts, and then everything else was less than half as frequent as those two. And, if you keep going down the list, past the pick and roll man, past the post ups, past, putbacks, you get to the fact that he had 26 transition plays the entire season and was in the 91st percentile in terms of finishing. It's like all these athletic indicators and very little in terms of, the sort of obvious athletic indicators on the stat sheet, right? Again, like half a block per game. He wasn't turning back shots, but they weren't scoring over him either. And so I'm just left in this very confused place of, okay, his field goal numbers don't look as good as the at rim stuff because he's taking so many mid-range jumpers and so many 3-point jumpers, right? It's like, he took more long twos, more 17-footer to inside the 3-point line jumpers than almost anyone. He was in the 95th percentile in frequency, and he was okay, but, it wasn't spectacular. He had 36% of those shots, right? And so again, even though I picked him for deep dives and, I mentioned some of those numbers. I think his at rim finishing was absurdly even higher than 74% when we did the Cenac episode. And yet he takes so many more jumpers than he does finishes around the basket. And, he's this great athlete, right? 37-foot vertical at the combine, and, all of the indicators that this is someone who can run and jump out of the gym, but he doesn't block shots. I'm just so confused on what Cenac is even at this point, right? And this is after a full college season of tape following his high school tape, which was quite impressive. But, the stuff that stood out the most with his high school tape at Link Academy was, okay, this guy is a 7-foot shooter, right? You mentioned the Chris Bosh thing, and absolutely, that's the comp that I've seen more than anything else. But the numbers just do not match the aesthetics at all in a way that is very positive for Cenac, but also exceptionally confusing, because none of what he's supposed to be good at, he's actually good at. And all of the things that nobody talks about, he's fantastic at. And he's also insanely inconsistent. His last 5 games, 17-14 against Kansas, 5-4 against Arizona, 7 points but 18 rebounds against Idaho, 17-9 against Texas A&M, and then in the loss to Illinois, he had 6 points and grabbed 10 rebounds, but was not impacting the game in any sort of way on the offense. I just there's only so many different ways I could say I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And it's like definitely a first round pick in my mind, but the range is just so massive of, something given the rest of his tape has to be a blip. And I don't know if it's that he's a better shooter than he showed, or if it's that he's not quite as good of a rim protector or finisher as he showed, but none of it matches up and it drives me insane.
Yeah, like his fit, I think, is one of the most trickiest, mind-boggling in the draft class, because are we in love with what he will become, or are we giving him kind of the benefit of doubt, right? In terms of, is he actually going to live up to more of his ceiling, or is he going to be more of his floor, which is there's so many question marks, because at the rim too, right? He's 6'11", 245, and opponent shot just, a little bit under 50% against him around the basket. That should be not as high as that, right? And especially with the ball in his hands, one of the traits that kind of drew me to him, coming out of high school, is that, okay, this guy is 6'11", has real on dribble shot creation chops, right? And especially him going to him, he has that gather dribble to his game, step through, that is there with him, but it's not consistent enough to say, okay, he's getting to his spots, but mostly in the mid-range, and he's not converting as high as we thought he would to end the season. So it's kind of okay, then what is his, main kind of marquee skill? And it's kind of hard to find one with him, because he's not as consistent as, if he were to finish at, 75% at the rim, and to show that, okay, he's making more of his threes or getting to the line a lot more, 4 times per game at, a 70% clip. Okay, maybe it's there, right? The inklings are there, but it's just not. So it's kind of okay, would I rather have, all the big man that, we talked about before him, that I can hone into one skill that they're really good at and they've improved every single year. And it's kind of with Cenac, it's I feel he kind of stabilized out a little bit in terms of that way. So I'm with you of, kind of how I think about Koa P too. It's kind of okay, could he, be a faller in the shot? But I really like him at the end of the day. It's kind of I don't know what to do with him. So I think he's a prospect that come draft night, I think all of us are kind of going to be on our heels of okay, where is he going to go?
That's the thing that drives me nuts, though, is he does have a signature skill. It's just not the one that anyone says it is, right? His at rim finishing is the best of anybody in this class just by raw numbers. But, the conversation is, oh, this is 7-foot jump shooting big. It's okay, well, where are the jump shots? Because he's finishing around the basket, but he's not making his shots.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with his, number one, his jumpers are 36%, which is average. I mean, all of his jumper categories are, just in the average or good, right? He's not converting once he's getting there, but that's kind of what he's looking for, 75% at the rim, but it's not he's going out of his way to think, okay, maybe he can, be a defensive playmaker at the next level or show more passing shots, because, when you look at his pick and roll numbers, right? As Roman, he was below average at he ranked in the 20th percentile. And for a guy with his stature, his fluidity, his mobility, that should not be the case at all, especially when he's playing for, Kelvin Sampson down there at Houston, and with the backcourt of Emmanuel Sharp, Kingsley Flemings as well. So yeah, definitely a lot of question marks with him.
Yeah, it's just, again, I don't know what to do with the fact that none of it makes any sense, but hopefully he goes to a team that can maximize the things that he does well and bring him along slowly as a shooter, because the best version of Chris Cenac is someone who was sixth in the high school class for a reason. And it's this weird thing where, like, did he have a disappointing season? Maybe not, but also just not, in no way, shape, or form was that the season that I think anyone anticipated he would have, for better and for worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nick, if you were to, guess come draft night, what top 3 teams in your opinion should take a look at him?
I think that, so not at 14, but at 18, Charlotte might be interesting. Have him be sort of a stretch element, play him alongside Moussa Diabate, right? Have him slot in at the 4. There's a ready-made slot for him at power forward in Charlotte. And hopefully he'll, in Charlotte, get to run out a lot more in transition, because on the rare occasions where he did do that, he was spectacular at it. And he is a really, really good athlete for someone his size. That's I think a place where he could really show out in terms of, him getting to unlock the best of what he does while also just getting to throw down a ton of lobs, because that was the thing that he did the best job of this past season. And then I think the San Antonio fit is interesting, just in terms of, again, we can mock every single big man that's in the first round range to San Antonio, and it wouldn't be the most nonsensical thing in the world. I'm curious about what Atlanta would look like, because there he'd definitely be more of a 5 than a 4, playing alongside Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels and that crew, Nickeil Alexander-Walker in Atlanta. And certainly seems like Onyeka Okongwu's days in Atlanta are numbered. And so, bringing in a replacement center who can also do some non-centery things, I think that might work better in Atlanta than some other places. Of the places where he's likely to be mostly a 5, I think Atlanta would offer him more flexibility than some of the other spots. So those are definitely the 3 I think that I would be looking at. But again, because his season was so weird, but he was such a highly ranked high school prospect, I feel like his range is big. Like, I don't think he's going in the lottery, but pretty much anywhere outside of the lottery in the first round would not surprise me. And, if he happens to be the guy who falls out of the first, I think that, pretty much all of the first 5 teams in the second might be looking to pounce if he's one of the guys that drops. And, certainly if the Knicks hold on to 31, he's someone who I think would make a lot of sense. I mean, he makes sense for them at 24 as well, but I think he's someone who, again, his range might be as large as any big man in the class.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think from 19 to 30 is kind of like, okay, when one of these big bands is off the board, it's kind of like, okay, now it's starting to trickle down. I think we're gonna get a better sense of what these teams' outlooks are and what they're ultimately thinking. And I think we'll just kind of start from there. But I think it's super interesting, because I could also mention maybe the Lakers maybe take a chance. Obviously they do have Jackson Hayes and DeAndre Ayton, but I think having Chris Cenac too, just to have kind of this depth piece in the front court that has all the possible outcomes with him, but has a lot to love as well, just needs to work on being consistent. And 75% at the rim as a freshman in a Houston, defensive minded squad. Like, he also has a great motor too. Like, I don't think we've touched on that enough. Like, he is, he's not afraid to try a lot of things. And I think it's just the decision making and more of how to be kind of like this plug and play place piece will kind of work out as he's, is older, gets into kind of a system that, fits him at the NBA level, but I could see him kind of coming in off the bench for the Lakers and, providing that spark. And I think limited minutes, because I think he wouldn't obviously play it right away with them, because I think they have kind of what they need right now for, with Jackson Hayes and DeAndre Ayton, but also DeAndre Ayton doesn't have that motor to his game at all. And me, watching him with the Suns, I'm the first one to tell you guys that, but but I think Cenac has a lot to offer on that end too. And, if he starts to figure out, when he gets those looks in the mid range of, breaking down, the more mobile 3 and 4s, and he's also a versatile defender as well. I think he'll, start to, go 10 toes down of, this is my game. I'm going to finish the looks that are given to me, but I can also create for myself a little bit more than, what I showed at Houston.
Yeah, the Lakers fit makes a ton of sense. I mean, in practice, he's shown that he could be that lob catcher, rim finisher, and in theory, he's that shooter. So he checks both of Luka's boxes.
There you go.
All right, shall we move on to our last 2 prospects?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we've got 2 big men left. One of them, I think, has an outside shot at the first round, so we'll go with him first. This was your guy, Henri Veesaar. So what made you decide to go with Henri Veesaar for some deep dives episode in the distant past?
Yeah, Henri Veesaar is, he's a true 7-footer that he's a floor-spacing 7-footer, right? I mean, he converted 42.6% of his 3-point attempts at, 3 per game, 17 points, 8.7 rebounds. And, he started his career at Arizona. And then obviously one of our guys, Mo Crevis, ultimately, showed a lot more there. And he kind of was like, okay, I want to find my footing a little bit more, hone into a role. And that's why he transferred partly to UNC, right? But had an incredible year as a redshirt sophomore, and obviously played with the likes of Caleb Wilson, top 4 pick. And I think with Henri Veesaar too, he has a lot more to his game than, people kind of see on the outside looking in, right? He's not going to have a lot of other, he's not your terms of, hey, this guy is an emphatic finisher, the guy that we're going to talk about next, Nate Biddle, you need to sell me on him a lot more. But Henri Veesaar, he, if you want a floor spacing big that can also rim run for you, he's quick on his feet, can play off, pick and roll actions, pick and pop actions, right? But he's not going to, with the big man class and how teams kind of generalize these types of big man, Henri Veesaar might fall a little bit later than he could potentially not be, just because of, we mentioned 6 guys already that one, they're, have a lot more to their game, right? They can run the floor a lot better. They can operate in tons of different schemes. They've improved year after year, which Henri Veesaar has, and he's honed in on a lot bigger role this year. And with also Caleb Wilson being out, Henri Veesaar, showed up big time. And I think with him too, coming into, a new system and put up the numbers that he did, it's super telling. And I think with him, I know Pistons fans are would we be, intrigued of having Veesaar at 21? I personally think the Pistons need to go more of the point guard route that we kind of discussed in our first episode when we're kind of diving into all the positions that, we covered on deep dives this year. But Henri Veesaar is a prospect that I think he has a wide range as well, same as Cenac. I think a lot of teams can be interesting. And I think just how the draft is laid out, the end of the first round is okay, that's kind of big man city in a way. They could use, positionless guys like Zubia Gapor or, Joshua Jefferson, or they want a stretch big that is a true 7-footer that brings that strength and size. And Henri Veesaar isn't, skinny as well, right? He's 7 foot 227, but he plays a lot bigger. I think he's, he has broad shoulders, he has a good base. I think he doesn't get really knocked around on his spots as much as one would say as a Cenac, right? Who am I thinking of? Anyway, my brain is mushed during this day, but yeah, I think Henri Veesaar, he's not same with Nate Biddle that we're going to talk about. He still has learnings to go in terms of how fluid is he on his feet. He sometimes gets caught up on switches, or he's more of a drop defender. type to me, but a lot of teams in the end of the first round could use him. So yeah, I think he's a guy that could, the short sell, maybe I'm, rambling on, but he's a true 7-footer that can stretch the floor and is efficient at doing it, can crash the glass, and can also play a lot of too big action, which teams, tend to look for at this side of the draft.
So I'm going to start with one of the points you mentioned about the center run. And this is counting Zuby as a power forward on my board. I have as many centers from 22 to 29 on my board as I have in the entirety of the second round. And Henri Veesaar is one of them. Nate Biddle's another one. And the last one is Ugena Onyenso out of Virginia. But that's it. Like, there are a ton of first round quality big men and really not all that much after, which, I think it's going to be, flavor of the month, depending on which of these teams want what. I have Veesaar at 33 on my board. So, basically one of those guys where it's like, okay, one of the first picks of day 2 is, I wouldn't be surprised if 2 of the first 3 picks on day 2 were just, okay, which are the centers that dropped out of the first round? And, there are going to be teams who come calling for the Knicks pick at 31. There are going to be teams calling Memphis at 32. There are, probably going to be teams calling Brooklyn and Sacramento at 33 and 34, right? Of, okay, there really isn't much once you get past the sort of first round / borderline first round crop, which, again, is why Biddle is quite a bit lower. And then there's another big drop to Onyenso, and those are the, second round centers that I have. And a lot of that is because a whole bunch of guys dropped out. Our guy Ruben Chinyelu is no longer in the draft, right?
Yeah.
Malachi Moreno no longer in the draft. Pat Gongo went back to school. Our guy Krivas, who probably would have been a first round guy more than a second round guy, right? The reason that there are fewer players in this pod than either of the other two we've done, a lot of that is due to withdrawals, and also just the fact that the first round is quite loaded with some really fascinating big man prospects. Once you get beyond that, it gets slimmer pickings. But going back to Veesaar specifically, I mean, grabbing almost 9 rebounds a game while playing with Caleb Wilson is a feat that should not be understated. And, his offensive rebounding was lower on a rate basis in terms of, just raw stats. He got about as many as he did at Arizona, but, obviously playing a much larger role for UNC this year. Veesaar is a fascinating case in terms of, there is the stretch element. That's what you're getting him for. He's not the best free throw shooter, which is not the greatest indication of touch. That does worry me a bit. This is also, granted, he's proven himself as a shooter previously, but this is his first year at like real volume as a shooter. And so I do wonder what the projection looks like if he's, mid 30s as opposed to low to mid 40s. But I do buy the shot. I'm just saying words here. I mean, really, honestly, what it comes down to is, every indicator in terms of the jump shooting this year has been incredibly positive. Sample size of jump shooting is always something that I'm worried about with players in terms of, okay, how real is this? And when the free throw numbers and the free 3-point numbers don't match up, I tend to get worried. But, also, like, Bruce Bowen exists. There have been plenty of people who were really good 3-point shooters who just for whatever reason struggled when they got to the free throw line. So that's not particularly a concern. There are a couple of things that Veesaar did this year that I was really impressed by. The first is he cut down his fouling a lot, which is huge for his translation, right? This is a guy who, again, he can provide value defensively, but you're not putting him out on the floor for his defense. And so him just getting better at not making mistakes, at keeping himself on the floor, that I think is a huge part of his translation. And then the passing stuff, I couldn't agree more. I think he's got a lot more to show than he was able to this past year in terms of his ability to make plays for others. And in what will almost certainly be a reduced role, like I don't think he's averaging 17 and 9 next year at the NBA level, right? So with that in mind, I think he's someone who can absolutely fit into that stretch big role, just sort of figure out where he fits in, which is, pretty simple, pretty obvious given his game. And then, even if his shooting stabilizes out at slightly lower than 43%, if he continues to be a really high level jump shooter who just doesn't make mistakes on the defensive end, and yeah, is someone who you're probably going to want to have in drop most of the time. But the fact that he's a true 7-footer definitely helps with the argument there, right? Of, okay, there's, 6'11" and a quarter without shoes, right? He's a big dude, 7'2" wingspan, 230 pounds was lighter than I would have expected, but not problem level. Like, for like Baba Miller was 208. That worries me a bit. Veesaar at 230 doesn't really worry me that much at all. And I am very interested to see where he goes, because I think he'll be more fit dependent than a lot of these guys, just because, he will need to go to a team that can help him be a part in a defensive scheme rather than be leaned on in any sort of capacity defensively. But he and Caleb Wilson made a pretty good duo on both ends, and certainly if I mean, I think every slow 7-footer would benefit from playing alongside Caleb Wilson, right? I don't think that's a particularly brilliant insight to bring to the table, but there are definitely situations where he would make a lot of sense. I certainly have a couple of teams in mind, but I'm curious what you would think in terms of fits for Vasar and where you see
Yeah.
him going.
Yeah, I think with Veesaar too, like his prime fit to me, like he has to be fit with a primary rim protector to get the most out of his game, because he's not going to wow you at that end. Like he kind of needs someone to clean up that end for him, like despite him, being a floor spacer, legit 7-footer, and also 75% at the rim too, like is and his, putback percentage too. Like he's also insanely good at cleaning up on the glass, high IQ player, and obviously, giving that his strength and size. Like he needs to be paired with, maybe the Pistons do make sense with like Jalen Duren, or maybe, the Knicks too at, early in the second round of, him and Mitchell Robinson play, some minutes together, and him and, Mitchell Robinson just going back and forth. And I think with Henri Veesaar too, like his playmaking chops, 2.1 assists per game. And, it's worth mentioning too, like he's been kind of, eyes have been on him since he was, a teenager, right? Like 15 years old. Like he was the first Estonian player to play in a FIBA qualifier, and he averaged a double-double there as well. Like he's also always had kind of this potential to his game of, being this, two-way player, but he needs a primary rim protector that, is a hyper athlete, can clean up, what he can't get to, because him falling on that type of guy, I think is just going to prove him to the next level and, get the most out of, what his game is. But with him too, I think, you mentioned kind of some great fits for him. Also, I'm trying to think. Maybe Houston at 39 would be kind of fun. Maybe Boston at 40. Maybe the Heat at 41. It would be kind of fun with him, with, Bam and Khalil Ware. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the whole, Giannis situation, and where he goes to and kind of disrupts, teams that we've heard in those rumblings. But yeah, I think the range with Henri Veesaar is pretty big, and maybe Nick, your team, the Kings at 34, maybe take a swing at him too, just because of his size and feel for the game. I mean, I think it depends on, what the Kings do at 7. But he could be a great stash piece, especially in the front court of, he's going to come in, bring valuable minutes, where you're going to kind of get with him. But yeah, he kind of needs to be paired with an emphatic big man at the next level.
Yeah, the Kings fit at 34 is interesting. I mean, anytime you have the team that was dead last in 3-point attempts and makes and 29th in percentage, and you can bring along someone like Veesaar who can actually shoot, that's valuable. I mean, I see the fit for sure. I also, think that OKC at 37, if you pair him with Chet, again, he's someone who can guard bulkier guys, certainly. And if it's just a drop scheme, I mean, he's got like 30 pounds on Chet, right? So,
Yeah.
that's something that could work. But there are a ton of teams in that early second round range that I think could definitely use Veesaar's skills.
And with him too, he played some of the most minutes of his career too, around like 30 minutes per
Yeah.
game. Like he made himself available. And even him, playing with the likes of Caleb Wilson, like you mentioned, he still was able to grab 9 rebounds per game with the type of, athlete that Caleb Wilson is and rebounder. Like that says a lot to me, especially when he's not an athlete, in that stretch of the word. So yeah, I think he's a big man that I think in the second round you get a ton of great value for what you're going to get. And he's a fun piece to have as you're kind of developing, maybe in these, kind of younger teams in that range.
And on to the last player who we've already teased in Nate Biddle, who, unlike some of the other players I covered in the Deep Dives Model article I wrote in January, he hasn't retired from basketball before the draft, so he's got that going for him. Yeah, Biddle is an interesting case in the sense that when you're talking about late second round guys, the vast majority of them never play in the NBA at all. And so, if you're picking in the late 40s or in the 50s and you think that Nate Biddle will get some NBA minutes at some point in his professional basketball career, that's a pretty solid pickup for, something in the late, again, late 40s, early 50s kind of range. And with Biddle, there's a lot to like, there's a lot to not like, and I think ultimately where I sit on Biddle at this point is he's a proven volume 3-point shooter, right? He's not fantastic, 33% from his college career, but he took a ton of them, right? He averaged 4.5 attempts per game from 3-point range this season, and I think he is a very underrated passer. He's someone who, positive assist to turnover ratio for his entire college career. That's, well, no, technically in his, 159 minutes in his freshman year, he had more turnovers than assists. But, outside of that tiny sample size, he's someone who's always been better at creating plays for others than, his mistake frequency. He seriously cut down on the fouling this past year without it significantly impacting his block rate. And given that is the defensive value that he provides, he's a legit 7'1", like 240, 250.
Yeah.
And if you station him as the guy, right under the basket in a drop scheme, he can fill that role. And so, for me with Biddle, it's a pretty simple calculus of, do I think that he is an NBA player in the right situation? Yeah, probably. There are teams that could use legitimate 7'1", 7-foot guys who have, again, not exactly an elite marksman, but a proven long-term history of being a solid shooter. And his free throw percentage dipped a bit this year, but for his college career, 74%, not great, nothing to write home about, but perfectly fine, perfectly adequate, right? And at the rim, he finished 68% of his shots. His field goal percentage overall looks worse because he took a ton of, I would say, ill-advised mid-range. Well, most of his jump shots were from 3-point range, those are the jump shots you want him to take, right? Trailer in transition, hand off at the top of the arc, kick back to him. He is inconsistent with his screens, but when he sets them, they're real hard to get around. He is, again, I cannot overstate how much this is a big, big dude. Like, he's one of the, especially after Suigo dropped out, he's one of the biggest guys in the draft. And, he's an older player, which, part of why he's stuck around in college this long is, steady improvement, but also redshirt year due to injury, et cetera, et cetera. He was pretty highly recruited high school guy. He was 20th in his high school recruiting class. And, that's for the same reason as what he's proven over the past 2 seasons at Oregon. He's a big dude. He finishes around the basket. He can and will shoot threes. He's a prolific shot blocker who has significantly cut down on his mistakes. And if you're a team that needs a third center, I think you could do a whole lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, for me, he checks the boxes of, he's a real 7-footer, 7'1" with 7'6" wingspan, we'll let it fly from the 3-point range. He has that to his game, also an excellent passer for his size and, his archetype. But the thing that really gets me is that he is arguably the slowest player in this draft. Like his foot speed is just not there. And I think how we've talked about Mar, like his foot speed at the beginning of the year, especially on the perimeter, really, really worried me because he just like, even though he has such a plus wingspan, him laterally was just not there. Like it could be, with Mara, like he was playing against I forget who it was in Wisconsin. John Blackwell. And he had a ton of space to his game. Like, and he just let John Blackwell do a little in and out cross him and, shoot it over him. Right. And he was there, but he just couldn't get there because his feet were not allowing him to, but his arms were. And that's kind of how I feel about Nate Biddle a lot more, especially on the perimeter. Like he is just going to get taken apart on the perimeter. But if you're looking at him in kind of this third big man role, in the later half of the second round, like it does make sense, right? But I think, there's, he could play in the NBA, he could not. Like I think he, could get a cup of coffee because has that size, that passing chops, and he's a consistent, 3-point shooter. But he also went through lulls through the season as well, like 25% in the first half of the season, then 32%, then 35%. But the volume was still kind of there. And then his free throw percentage as well. Like he can get to the line, he's powerful, he's strong, but I just kind of worry that, athletic players on the perimeter and big man will kind of just take it to him when he does get those minutes on, what team ultimately drafts him. Like that's what I really worry about him, because I think he kind of honed into his size and strength a little bit too much. But yeah, his athleticism really worries me. And that's why I kind of wanted you to sell me on him more, Nick, because I think you're a little bit higher than I am on him, just because I think his foot speed is just nowhere near like adequate in my sense.
And that's the knock. I mean, if he does get a cup of coffee in the NBA, it's going to be that. It's going to be that unless he's, directly underneath the basket, he's a defensive liability. And I'm not arguing that, right? I think that's definitely that's the issue, right? And I think the fact that he cut down on his fouling is going to be huge because he's going to get attacked, and if he is just slapping guys all the time, he's going to be out the game in a hurry, right? If he can't get the fouling under control. And so the fact that he has done a much better job of that is really the biggest positive indicator that I'm sort of leaning on in terms of, okay, if he does work out at the NBA level in terms of getting a cup of coffee, it's going to be a team that's like, look, here's the deal. On the offensive end, you run up to the 3-point line, you stand there, you wait for the kickback, you set a couple hard screens, and then you run back to the other end of the floor. Yeah. And when you run back to the other end of the floor, make sure you station yourself directly underneath the basket and don't move.
Yeah.
And, again, it's one of those things where it's pretty clear what the sell is. It's very clear what the warts are. And ultimately, for me, it's, again, just the question of, how many minutes does the average, say, 48th pick in the NBA play? The average 48th pick doesn't play in the NBA. Mm-hmm. And, so going back to the Drew Timme thing from earlier, I think because of Biddle's shooting touch and because of his shot blocking, he's not quite in the Timme realm in terms of just this dude only does well in college because he's big and he's older than everybody else. And the fact that, he's 7'1" as opposed to 6'9" also helps in that regard. But yeah, I mean, I could very easily see, we show up in Summer League and Nate Biddle is playing for, I don't know, just I'm going to pick a team that I think might make sense for him at semi-random here. Let's say the Nuggets pick him up with the 49th pick, right? And, they say, hey, we're going to run you with Theron Holmes off the bench. And, maybe, well, I don't think he's going to play with Jokic. I don't think he can play those two guys together. But, just an example, right? He shows up the Summer League and the inverse Tari Eason happens, where, with Tari Eason, it was like within 5 minutes of his first summer league game, it's like, okay, this guy is, even by NBA standards, such a ludicrous athlete that he's going to figure it out. It could very easily be the opposite with Biddle of, oh no. Like, I knew it would be a problem, but I didn't know it'd be this bad, right?
Yeah.
I could very easily see that happening. But again, I'm not trying to sell Biddle as like, oh, this is someone who's going to be your future franchise center, right?
Yeah.
It's not that. It's, again, after we get out of that sort of mid to late first round group of big men, there really isn't much. And so, the question is, okay, well, do you go with someone like Onyenso, who I have slightly lower, who, absolutely crazy shot blocking metrics, really not all that much else, and also doesn't play. Like, he averaged like 18 minutes a game, I think. Biddle missed time this year due to injury, and, also redshirted his junior year, which is, a bit concerning on the health front. But last year he played 35 games for Oregon, 28 minutes a game. This year, 31 minutes a game on a team that needed him to score more and shoot more. And he did both of those things more, while also cutting down on his foul rate to stay in the game more, getting to the line more, even though he didn't shoot quite as well. I could definitely see a world where he ends up on the right team that can insulate him defensively, allow him to just be a shot blocking presence, and maybe he gets in a few games. Again, in any draft, but particularly in this year's draft, where like basically everybody after like 35 on my board pretty much withdrew from the draft. Like, there are going to be a lot of picks in the late 40s, early 50s who never play an NBA minute. And, if I'm trying to decide between rolling the dice on someone like, I don't know, someone who I have slightly lower on my board in Baba Miller, like, am I rolling the dice on Baba Miller, or am I just going to say, we need a third big man for this year and next year, and if he plays in the NBA after that, great, but that's all we need? Like, I'm not, again, the ceiling for Baba Miller is much higher, but if the only bet is who plays more NBA minutes next season, Nate Biddle or Baba Miller, I might take the Nate Biddle bet. And so that's why we covered him on Deep Dives. That's why I'm doing my best version of the sell here, but not exactly the most enthusiastic sell you're going to hear, because, again, there is reasons for skepticism, and I don't deny that, but I also think the bar that he needs to clear, given the very obvious skills and size that he provides, is low enough that some team is probably going to take that chance. And I think there's a better chance that he plays a little bit than that he never touches an NBA floor.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And I think just while you're talking, going through the later half of the second round too, maybe the Magic at 46, just with playing off, Wendell Carter Jr. and Biate and, playing off Paolo Banchero too. Like, I think Nate Biddle could come in off the bench and, kind of be an equalizer source of sense of just having a true 7-footer with a plus wingspan that can knock down much needed shots on the perimeter, come in, get to the line a few times and kind of just knock in, game stirring shots that, okay, hey, maybe we're down by 10 points. We kind of need more size on our end. We kind of need more floor spacing. Like, Nate Biddle can come in and, make those shots for a team, right? Like, I think his role, like if he, does get a cup of coffee in the NBA, like that's what he's kind of going to come in and do. And he has that footwork to his game as well. And I think him playing off, another big, ultimately like Henri Veesaar too, kind of helps his case a little bit more in terms of, projecting him at the next level. But everything you said, like, definitely makes sense. And I think it'll be interesting to see where he goes too. But I think him, if the Magic were to kind of look at him at 46, I think that's kind of like, for me personally, like that could be like his ceiling there in the range. But, looking kind of further down the board, maybe Atlanta at 57, Pelicans at 58 would be enticing. But yeah, I think it makes sense for him because of, what you're going to get with him right at the end of the day.
All right, we are almost done here at the end of this marathon podcast as part of this marathon series, as part of this marathon draft cycle. But before we go, just our usual quick hits. And I thought it would be fun if we just cape for our guys at the end here. And we each picked a player who is sort of our deep dives guy of the year. And, again, because basically everybody we covered on deep dives was considered a second round pick at the time that we did the episodes. We're not going to be saying Darren Peterson here, right? But we each have someone who we really believe in, who we're higher on than consensus, who we talked about on deep dives. And I have done more than enough rambling to intro this particular segment. So, Paige, who is your deep dives guy of the year?
Yeah, I think if you're an avid watcher of our show, you've probably heard me say this prospect's name like a million gazillion times. Cameron Carr out of Baylor. 6'6", 7'2" wingspan. Basically the marquee archetype when you think of, a 3-and-D type of guy, right? It can play both ends of the floor, runs around, screams, volume, movement shooter, right? 40% from 3-point range. Enamored attacker at the rim, has had some emphatic dunks this season too. Like he is just going to run through you. He's on the skinnier side, right? But he has that length and size to kind of make up for it, has the mobility, has the athleticism, can also generate a lot of on the defensive end as well, playmaking wise. Great stock generation. He's been, rising a lot more too, Nick. And I think me kind of being selfishly, I kind of want him to fall a little bit, kind of in the Pistons range. But I think the Thunder would kind of be like, what are you guys doing if you're not going to at least take a look at him at, 12, right? And I think he could also make a case for a lot of other teams there as well. Miami Heat make a lot of sense. Like I could see him fitting so easily there. Like Cinderella putting the glass slipper on, like seamless fit out there in South Beach. Cameron Carr, he offers a lot. He also has great shooting mechanics, can operate off of DHOs, coming off curl actions, floppy actions. And one thing too, like I mentioned throughout the years that, Baylor had, perceived down year, right? Which doesn't happen quite often. And him and our guy, Tuna Yesufu that we talked about this year too, they were kind of the limelight of the Baylor offense. And Cameron Carr played a role that he's not really going to play in the NBA. Like the ball was in his hands a ton of the time when it was in Tune days, and them playing off each other. You're letting a redshirt sophomore and a freshman be the focal points of your offense, and Cameron Carr definitely produced on both ends of the floor. And I think his ceiling just keeps getting higher by the day for me. And I think, if you're looking at a guy that has the size, has the shooting qualms, can elite athlete, can finish around the rim, can, improve out as a playmaker too, he's going to get a lot of looks in the lottery range for sure.
So my guy of the year is probably not going to go in the lottery, but I still will campaign hard for him until the moment that he's drafted, and hopefully that moment is at 34 to the Sacramento Kings. I'm going with Ryan Conwell, who's also someone I wrote about on the website, NewZealandNBA.com. And the thing with Ryan Conwell is he is one of the most versatile shooters I ever scouted. At the time we talked about the Jordan Hawkins comparison, for better and worse for Jordan Hawkins at the NBA level. But with Conwell, he's someone who not only is he just this absolutely ridiculous shooter, if you look just at the percentage, this year in particular, you won't be all that impressed. He hit 35%. He had, I would argue, the most difficult diet of three-pointers of anybody in college basketball this year, and he took almost 10 of them a game. I lost count of the number of, and I didn't watch many, but the Louisville games that I watched where Mikael Brown Jr. didn't play, and it was like Ryan Conwell 17 points on 7 of 14. The entire rest of the Louisville roster like 9 points on 4 of 23. It wasn't quite to the level of Cam Carr and Tunde Yesufu having no help at Baylor, but certainly when Mikael Brown Jr. was out, Ryan Conwell was tasked with an inordinate load on the offensive end, and he absolutely lived up to it, both as a scoring threat. I mean, 19 points a game, nothing to sneeze at, but also, took on a lot more as a playmaker. And he's not someone who's going to be a primary point guard for a team, but in addition to all that he provides on the offensive end, he's 6'4", 215 pounds, built like a fire hydrant, and really showed out in the athletic testing at the combine. But even beyond any of that, I just fully believe in, this is a guy who will be playing on his fifth team in 5 years next season.
Yeah.
And everywhere he shows up, he's made everybody around him better. He's shot at an incredibly difficult diet of shots and knocked them down at a really high rate. And he's someone who, again, he's not someone who's going to be your point of attack guy defensively, but fits into a scheme, plays his role really well on the defensive end, isn't going to get pushed around or bullied by anybody. And, similar to Cam Carr, I'm just imagining him in a role where there isn't so much of the offense put on his shoulders like there's been each of the last 3 years. I mean, from Indiana State to Xavier to Louisville this past year, every year he's had more of an offensive burden than you would have expected heading into the season. And every year he's lived up to that. And I fully expect him to be one of those guys who goes early in the second round, and with by January there are going to be people saying, why did we let him fall this far? That's so clear what he does at a high level and how well he does it. And when pairing all of this sort of athletic tools with just the poise that he brings to every game, the way that he attacks opposing defenses, both in terms of getting his own shot and in terms of creating openings for others. I just adored watching Ryan Conwell's film this year, and if he does fall into the second round, I think he's going to be one of the steals of the draft.
Yeah, I mean, he just has a special gravity to him as an off-ball scorer as well. And with Mikel Brown Jr., being out dealing with injury as well, like he showed up big time, and he's just a bucket getter, right? And I think I'm rooting for you, Nick. Like I hope he, falls in the second round to your Kings, because I think he would fit in great with that squad. Just bring that off ball dribble juice and obviously that shooting volume. And just getting hot in every minute, right? Like he can get hot in a hurry, and he can kind of just put a team on his back and kind of just go to work. And that's kind of what the Kings kind of need, especially in the second round. So
yeah, that'd be nice. And I've said the awful 3-point shooting numbers for the Kings often enough. I mean, even if he does shoot 35% again, that's still going to improve the Kings shooting.
Yeah. So, yeah. The bar is not high.
No, it is not. And Ryan Conwell clears it by leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
All right, Paige, we did it.
We did it.
So thank you all so much for tuning in to Deep Dives for our, roulette wrap-up series here and for this season. It's been a joy sharing this space with you for the past season, Paige, and I'm looking forward to hopefully doing it again for next year and for
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's been a hell of a season too, and I think covering a draft as great as this one, a generational draft, we've gotten to talk about prospects all over the sun, right? And I think it's super exciting to see where these players will go. Obviously, our guys, players that we're kind of in their corner, but also other people might be higher or lower and on them. So it's always fun to talk shop with you, Nick, about players we might agree on, disagree on, and it's gonna be fun come next week.
All right, that will do it for us. Thank you so much to my wonderful co-host Paige Otto. You can find her on social media at PaigeOtto_. You can find me on social media at NBA Johnson, and you can find both of our written work on NoCeilingsNBA.com. If you've been enjoying the show, please be sure to leave a rating and a review in whatever podcast player you might be using. 5 stars, always much appreciated. If you're checking us out on YouTube, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any feedback regarding the deep dive specific portion of the podcast, feel free to reach out to us either via the aforementioned social media channels, or you can shoot me an email, nickaj.nba@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.